They called him the Muscles from Brussels. But behind those muscles was a man quietly breaking inside. When I first read about Jean-Claude Van Damme's story, I expected action, triumph, and glory. But what I found instead was heartbreak, loneliness, and self-destruction. A man who once stood as the world's ultimate action hero, yet couldn't escape the battles inside his own mind. This isn't the story of fame. This is the story of how fame almost destroyed him. Welcome to Back of the Day. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, because here, UIT was the late 1990s. The golden era of action films was fading, and so was Van Damme. Once, his name could sell out theaters around the world, but now, the headlines weren't about his kicks or his charisma. They were about drugs, divorces, and darkness. Jean-Claude was spiraling. He was addicted to cocaine, consuming up to 10 grams a day. He was losing control of his career, his family, and even his sanity. Doctors diagnosed him with bipolar disorder, but by then, the damage was already done. Hollywood had turned its back on him. He was no longer the hero on screen. He had become the villain in his own story. How did a boy from Brussels, who once dreamed of greatness, fall so far? To understand that, we need to go back, before the lights, before the fame. Jean-Claude Camille François van Varenberg was born in Sint Agatha Belgium, a quiet suburb of Brussels, Belgium, in 1960. He was a shy, sensitive child, not the kind of boy anyone imagined would become an action star. His father enrolled him in karate classes when he was just 10 years old, hoping to build his confidence. And that's where something awakened in him. Karate became his escape. Every punch, every kick was a way to silence the voices of insecurity. He trained relentlessly, sometimes 6 hours a day. By the time he was 18, he had earned a black belt and even won a European championship. But Jean-Claude wanted more than medals. He wanted the world to know his name. He dreamed of Hollywood, that magical place where the strongest, boldest, and most beautiful became immortal. So, in 1982, with only $400 in his pocket, he boarded a plane to America. He didn't know anyone. He didn't even speak fluent English. But he had one thing: belief. In Los Angeles, Van Damme worked as a carpet layer, a pizza delivery man, even a limo driver. He lived in cheap apartments, slept in cars, and sometimes didn't eat for days. But he never stopped training, his kicks echoing through the empty alleys of La. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 1984, while working as a waiter, he met action star Chuck Norris. Van Damme convinced him to take him on as a sparring partner, and that small opportunity opened a door. Soon after, he landed tiny roles in low-budget films, and in 1988, his life completely transformed. That was the year Bloodsport became a cult sensation. Audiences had never seen anything like him. The splits, the speed, the style. He wasn't just another fighter, he was a dancer of violence, graceful and deadly at once. Overnight, Jean-Claude Van Damme became a global icon, a hero for every dreamer who ever believed that willpower could rewrite destiny. From there, the hits came fast: Kickboxer, Cyborg, Lionheart, Double Impact, Universal Soldier, Time Cop. By the early 1990s, Van Damme was at the top of the world. He was making millions per movie, adored by fans everywhere. Hollywood finally had its next great action star. But behind the fame, something darker was growing. Van Damme was no longer the humble boy from Brussels. He was now trapped in the illusion of invincibility. The fame, the pressure, the isolation, it all began to twist him. He started partying, staying up for days, and chasing perfection in everything: his body, his career, his relationships. He once said, "When you have everything, you start to see the emptiness of it all." And for Jean-Claude, that emptiness soon became unbearable. By 1994, he was at his peak. Time Cop became his biggest box office success, earning over $100 million worldwide. But at the same time, his marriage was crumbling, and he was drowning in addiction. He would later admit, "I was using cocaine like it was vitamins." The man who once inspired millions could no longer inspire himself. He tried rehab multiple times, but always relapsed. The studios lost faith in him. Friends disappeared, and even his own reflection became a stranger. He once said, "I looked in the mirror and didn't know who that guy was anymore." By the late 1990s, Jean-Claude Van Damme, the unstoppable force of Hollywood, was broken. When I look back at that time in his life, it feels like watching someone drowning in slow motion. He had fame, money, and the body of a warrior, yet the soul of a wounded child. Jean-Claude once said, "I was alone in a crowd of millions," and that loneliness was the one opponent he couldn't knock out. He was battling not just addiction, but also bipolar disorder, something very few people understood then. His moods would swing from unstoppable energy to deep depression. He'd go days without sleep, convinced he could do anything. Then suddenly, he'd collapse, hiding from the world, overwhelmed by guilt and emptiness. Doctors prescribed medication, but Van Damme didn't always take it. He believed he could fix himself with discipline, with training, with sheer will. But this wasn't a fight he could win with punches or kicks. It was a war inside his own mind. By 1997, his career was hanging by a thread. He was fired from films, abandoned by studios, and mocked by tabloids. He divorced again, lost custody battles, and barely held on to what remained of his fortune. Hollywood had moved on. His fall wasn't just professional, it was personal. He said in an interview, "I hurt people who loved me. I became the person I swore I'd never be." For years, he drifted through low-budget films and direct-to-video releases, each one a shadow of what he once was. And yet, he kept going, because somewhere deep inside, that little boy from Brussels, still in the early 2000s, something began to change. He started facing his demons instead of running from them. He spoke openly about his mental health, about addiction, about failure. He apologized to his family, to his fans, to himself. He once said, "I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm human. I fall, but I get up." That honesty became his redemption. In 2008, Van Damme made a shocking comeback, not in a blockbuster, but in a quiet, self-reflective film called JCVD. In it, he played himself, not the superstar, not the fighter, but the broken man behind the mask. There's a moment in that movie where he looks directly into the camera and says, "I've made mistakes. I'm not proud of them, but if I could go back, I'd still want to be me." That scene wasn't acting, it was confession, and it stunned the world. Critics called it the best performance of his life. Not because of his kicks, but because, for the first time, Jean-Claude Van Damme showed his heart. After JCVD, he slowly rebuilt his life, not as the untouchable hero, but as a man who had finally accepted his scars. He found peace in his family, his children, and in helping others avoid the same mistakes. He began meditating, practicing spirituality, and living a quieter life away from Hollywood's chaos. When asked if he regretted his past, he said no, because without the pain, I would never have understood what love really means. Today, Jean-Claude lives mostly in Europe, far from the noise of fame. He still trains, still acts occasionally, but he no longer chases perfection. He's finally at peace with the man in the mirror, something that once terrified him. When I think about his journey, I realize it's not just a story about an action star. It's a story about all of us, about the battles we fight that no one sees. Behind every smile, behind every success, there's often a storm we hide from the world. Van Damme once said, "My biggest fight was not in the ring, it was inside me." And maybe that's the real message of his life, because strength isn't about muscles or money. It's about admitting you're broken and still having the courage to keep going. He taught us that heroes aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who rise, even when no is so. The next time you hear his name, the next time you see those perfect kicks frozen in time, remember this: behind the legend of Jean-Claude Van Damme was a man who bled, cried, fell, and rose again. He showed us that even the strongest warriors carry invisible scars. If you've stayed with me till now, thank you. You've just heard one of the most powerful stories in Hollywood, a reminder that behind every spotlight, there's a shadow. This is Back of the Day, where we bring you the untold truths of the icons you thought you knew. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every legend has a secret. And we're just getting. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, even the strongest warriors fall before they learn to rise again. They called him the muscles from Brussels. But behind those muscles was a man quietly breaking inside. When I first read about Jean-Claude Van Damme's story, I expected action, triumph, and glory. But what I found instead was heartbreak, loneliness, and self-destruction. A man who once stood as the world's ultimate action hero, yet couldn't escape the battles inside his own mind. This isn't the story of fame. This is the story of how fame almost destroyed him.